I crossed the graduation stage alone, my name echoing into a room packed with families that weren't mine. The applause washed over me like a distant tide, a sound meant to celebrate achievement, but all I could feel was the hollow echo in my chest. 3 seats in the front row bore my name, reserved for my family. 3 empty chairs sat glaringly under the bright auditorium lights. My cap and gown felt heavier than ever, as if the fabric itself carried the weight of every year I'd spent pushing myself forward, every late night, every skipped party, every sacrifice I had made for the hope of a family who simply wasn't there. I smiled for the camera, shaking hands with the principal and clutching my diploma like a fragile shield. Behind me, students hugged parents, siblings, grandparents, everyone except me. The contrast between the joy around me and the emptiness in my own row was almost comical, if it weren't so painfully real. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Mostly, I just wanted to disappear. Later, as I scrolled through my phone, my family group chat lit up like a mocking neon sign. Super Bowl Sunday with the fam, the photo said, filled with nachos, beer, laughter, and a large celebratory banner for my younger cousin. My graduation was clearly an afterthought, if it registered at all. Every snapshot of them huddled together for selfies, watching the game, reminded me of what I had lost. The people who were supposed to cheer the loudest, who were supposed to see me shine. I walked to the parking lot, diploma clutched tightly, legs moving automatically as my heart caught in my throat. I collapsed into the driver's seat of my car, the roar of distant celebration mocking the silence inside me. For the first time, everything I'd held together, the hope, the endurance, the longing for approval, cracked. My shoulders shook, and tears blurred the world outside the windshield. Something inside me broke that day, and in the same breath, something else stirred. A spark of clarity, of defiance, of self-preservation. Emily, I realized, didn't need permission to step into her own life. I didn't know it yet, but the next choice I made would change my life forever. I wasn't naive enough to expect a parade. I just pictured my mother's soft smile in the audience, a quiet nod of pride, maybe even a whispered "I'm proud of you" as I crossed the stage. That was all I wanted, just to see that they cared, just to feel that my years of struggle mattered. The morning began like any other milestone day. The hum of the coffee maker, the bitter warmth of my first cup, the rented graduation gown carefully hung over the bathroom door. My second-hand heels clicked softly against the kitchen tiles as I practiced walking in them, adjusting the cap just so, reminding myself that dignity was something I could carry, even if no one else did. 6 years had passed in a blur of late-night lectures, early morning shifts, and endless deadlines. Each all-nighter, each skipped birthday party, each meal I ate in silence had been a step toward this day. I had imagined it countless times. The proud faces of my family in those reserved seats, clapping the loudest, tears in their eyes, sharing in my victory. I had held on to that hope like a fragile glass ornament, careful not to let it shatter. I checked my phone again, and again, and again. My finger hovered over the family group chat, hoping for a single message, a simple "see you soon." But all I found were the planning threads for the Super Bowl party. Who's bringing wings? Dad got the big screen ready. Don't forget the chili dip. Each photo and comment felt like a knife, reminding me of how invisible my milestone was to them. I told myself maybe they're just nervous. Maybe they'll show. Maybe it'll all be fine. But as I slipped into the gown and adjusted the cap, rehearsing my proudest smile in the mirror, the truth hovered at the edge of my mind, unspoken but persistent. Arriving at the auditorium, I spotted the 3 reserved seats in the front row, my name printed clearly on each. The seats gleamed under the harsh lights, empty and mocking. That was when the truth finally pressed its weight onto my shoulders. They weren't coming. They had never planned to. Tears hit my gown before I realized I was crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs. This was quieter, the kind that feels like pressure giving way after years of holding it in. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, diploma clutched in one hand, phone in the other, my body trembling from a mix of grief and anger. The parking lot around me was emptying, the distant cheers from other families mocking the silence I had carried all day. My phone buzzed again. Another family group chat photo. This time my younger cousin high-fiving friends, nachos in hand, laughter frozen in pixels. No mention of me. No acknowledgement of the day I had spent crossing that stage alone. The sting of invisibility hit harder with every notification. I set the phone down and let the tears fall, finally giving myself permission to release everything I had been holding inside. Then, a message from Aunt Helena appeared, like a single beam of light piercing a storm. "Emily, I saw you today. I'm so proud of you. Don't ever forget that." Somehow, the world shifted in that moment. Someone saw me. Someone knew my worth. For the first time, the crushing absence of my parents didn't define me. I opened the travel app one had used for months of daydreaming. Secret plans I had never thought I'd act on. Colorado. A quiet retreat in the mountains. Fresh air, space to breathe, space to think. My finger hovered over the book one-way button. Heart hammering, mind racing. And then I pressed it. For the first time in years I hadn't chosen them. I had chosen me to be. By the time I boarded the flight, the city lights were fading beneath me, replaced by a horizon streaked with pink and gold. Mountains rose in the distance, snow-capped and serene, a world away from the chaos I had left behind. I pressed my face to the window, inhaling the crisp, cool air of a new beginning that wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. A quiet smile settled over my lips, the first genuine one in hours, maybe days. I didn't know exactly what awaited me in Colorado, but for the first time, the decision felt entirely mine. The hurt of that day lingered, yes, but it no longer weighed me down. I was choosing life, choosing freedom, choosing myself. What happens now? I couldn't go home and pretend it didn't hurt. But maybe, just maybe I could start again on my own terms. The first thing I noticed when I stepped out of the shuttle was the sharp, clean scent of cedar and pine that seemed to wrap around me like a promise of calm. Snow crunched softly underfoot, and the retreat's warm lights invited me in as if they had been waiting just for me. My room overlooked a frozen lake, silver and still, untouched by noise or chaos. I sank onto the bed, letting the soft blankets envelop me, and for the first time in years my shoulders, heavy with disappointment and exhaustion, began to drop. I poured myself a cup of tea, inhaling the aroma, telling myself this was just a pause before returning to reality. Just a few days to breathe, to remember who I was beneath the constant shadow of neglect. I lay back, listening to the wind brushing across the lake's icy surface, and allowed myself something I hadn't in a long time: rest. The tight knot of tension in my chest loosened, and I realized I was smiling. Genuine, quiet, unburdened. After a massage at the retreat spa, I checked my phone, expecting a few well wishes from distant friends. 15 missed messages blinked at me. But there were no congratulations. Only demands. Messages from my family asking for money. Loans they wanted me to cover. Expenses they had emergencies for. Graduation wasn't mentioned once. My stomach dropped, a sick twist of déjà vu and disbelief. And then a message from Aunt Helena appeared, urgent and insistent. "Belle, honey, check your credit report. Now." My heart slammed. I tapped the link, watched the page load, and froze. There it was. Accounts I hadn't opened, loans I hadn't signed for, debts I didn't owe. Each one tied to dates matching their so-called emergencies. My mind raced, trying to process the numbers and names, the slow, horrifying realization settling like ice in my veins. This wasn't just neglect. It wasn't even casual betrayal. This was deliberate, calculated. They hadn't just skipped my graduation. They had used my future to fund their present. Each fraudulent account was a reminder of every trust one had given, every expectation I had held onto, and how carefully, deliberately, it had been stolen from me. I leaned back against the window, looking at the frozen lake, anger bubbling underneath the shock. Hurt turned to clarity, clarity to resolve. I had been blindsided for too long, but this time I could see it. This time I could act. This retreat, this space, wasn't just for rest. It was for rebirth, for reclaiming what was mine, and in that icy, silent room, I promised myself something. No one, not even family, would ever dictate my life or steal my future again. To be why the time I called Helena back, my hands were steady. The shaking from the past few days had finally settled into something sharper. A resolve. "You need a lawyer, sweetheart," Helena said, her voice firm but warm. Gather everything, every statement, every account, and fly back. You're not alone in this. I booked a flight to Hartford with a folder of evidence tucked under my arm. Credit reports, bank statements, screenshots of messages, and every scrap of proof I could gather. I wasn't just returning home. I was returning armed, with truth and clarity. The moment I arrived at my apartment, the pounding on my door started. Shouts, accusations, theatrics. They didn't waste a second. My father's fury rattled the hallway, my mother's dramatics filled the walls, and Mason, as always, stood indifferent, a silent witness to the chaos he'd helped orchestrate. I took a deep breath, dialing the landlord and requesting the police. Within minutes, officers were at the door. "Step outside, please," they instructed calmly. I watched as my family was escorted out, their protests and the word family bouncing off the walls, meaningless in that moment. Police. Really? We're your family. But the word family meant something entirely different to me now. I didn't need them to define me or control me anymore. The next day I met with Carmen, the lawyer Helena had recommended. Every detail was laid bare. Credit frozen, fraudulent accounts closed, restraining order filed and granted. My future, for the first time in years, felt like it was truly in my hands. The relief was quiet but deep, like water finally flowing through a dam that had been holding back years of fear and anxiety. So I packed my things. A new email popped up in my inbox. A job offer in Portland. The timing was uncanny, almost poetic. I didn't hesitate. Acceptance sent, plans made, boxes packed with Tessa's help. Every step I took was deliberate, a claim to independence, a refusal to be tethered to the chaos of Hartford or the people who had tried to steal my life. Boundaries, I realized, could be built and defended. For the first time, walls of protection rose around me, not out of fear, but out of self-respect, out of clarity, out of the simple understanding that my life was mine to live. And as I closed the apartment door one last time, the city behind me felt smaller, irrelevant, a place I had outgrown. I was moving forward, fully, boldly. Finally free. Portland was everything my old life wasn't. Quiet, respectful, unintrusive. The city's rhythm moved at a pace that let me breathe, let me think, let me rebuild. My new apartment overlooked a tree-lined street, the hum of city life gentle, not suffocating. My new team valued my work, my input, my presence, and no one asked for more than I could give. Healing crept in like warmth returning to numb fingers, subtle but persistent, reminding me I could live without constant tension knotted in my chest. I didn't tell anyone the full story at first. Some things were private, some wounds too raw to display, and some truths were mine alone to carry. Yet as months passed, the quiet success of normalcy, of showing up, doing well, being acknowledged for my work rather than taken for granted, restored pieces of me I had thought lost forever. Then came the invitation. A business leadership conference, focused on financial independence and empowerment. First I hesitated. Speaking. Sharing my story publicly. Vulnerability had cost me dearly in the past. But Carmen, who had guided me through the legal and financial chaos, reminded me firmly. Your voice could help someone. Someone who's been invisible, taken advantage of, afraid to stand up. I said yes. Backstage at the conference, the enormity of the ballroom hit me. Soft lighting, rows of polished chairs, a sea of expectant faces. I went over my notes, smoothing my blazer, shaking hands with organizers, and taking a deep breath. When I stepped to the podium, applause rose politely. I adjusted the microphone, smiled, and began. Thank you for having me. Today I want to talk about. In that moment I realized something. The worst was behind me. Or so I told myself. I was wrong, but in a way that would save me. Each word I spoke, each pause, each anecdote, carried the weight of survival, resilience, and the quiet strength I had found in reclaiming my life. I wasn't just speaking about finances. I was speaking about reclaiming control, about choosing oneself when others refused to, about the courage to rebuild from the wreckage left behind. And as the polite applause continued, I knew that this was only the beginning. My story, once silenced, was finally finding its voice. Then I heard the voice I'd spent months trying to outrun. That's our daughter. I froze for a fraction of a second, the polite applause of the ballroom fading into a sharp, confusing echo. At the back of the room, the doors burst open. My father, red-faced and furious, pushed forward, followed closely by my mother, theatrically clutching her handbag as if it contained the weight of the world, and Mason, phone in hand, recording everything. "She abandoned us. Left us with nothing," my father bellowed. Cameras rose automatically, some audience members reaching for their own devices, unsure what was unfolding. The murmurs grew louder. Some faces turned toward me, curious, concerned, but mostly stunned. My instinct screamed at me to shrink, to disappear into the shadows of the stage. But another voice, quieter yet firmer, surged forward from within. "Stand your ground." I lifted my chin. "Security. They are in violation of a court order. Remove them, please," I said, my voice steady. Mason's phone wavered in the air. "What about these frozen accounts? You can't just—" "I protected myself. From all of you," I interrupted, locking eyes with my father. The room went still. Every eye in the audience fixed on me. Every whisper died. And then the detective entered, calm but commanding, holding warrants for fraud. Officers moved quickly, cuffing my father, reading him his rights, and taking Mason into custody as he sputtered and protested. My mother's hand shot out, dramatic, pleading. "We need you, Emily. Please." I shook my head slowly. "You needed my credit. You never needed me." The ballroom was silent, tension thick. The only sound the soft shuffle of officers escorting my family away. I turned back to the podium, hands gripping the edges. My voice rose, clear and unwavering. "I want to speak about the empty seats, the parking lot, the retreat, the discovery, and the moment I realized I had to choose myself. I want to speak about fear, and the freedom that comes from standing up for it." I told my story in full, each word measured, raw and honest. The audience listened, rapt, some nodding, some holding back tears. When I finished, applause washed over me in a way I had never felt before. Not because they pitied me, but because they recognized the courage it takes to build a life from the wreckage of a family who never showed up for you. Family doesn't excuse criminal behavior. And sometimes you don't just walk away. You rise. Portland became more than a fresh start. We came home. The investigation wrapped up faster than I could have imagined. Carmen guided me through every step, evidence laid out in black and white, leaving no room for doubt or delay. The permanent restraining order was upheld, and my credit was restored, piece by piece, each account returning to its rightful place like bricks rebuilding a foundation. My apartment, once a temporary refuge, transformed into a true home. The office walls filled with reminders of the life I had chosen. Photos with friends who showed up without expectation, Tessa's vibrant plant perched proudly on the windowsill, and my diploma framed above the desk, not to prove anything to them, but to remind myself of what I had endured and accomplished. Some nights, the echoes of old guilt still surfaced, whispering, "Did you overreact? Could you have fixed it?" But they faded quickly now, drowned out by something steadier. Safety, peace, the soft but undeniable truth that I had saved myself. Months later, I found myself backstage at another speaking event. The room was enormous, lights soft, audience buzzing quietly with anticipation. I touched my note cards, feeling the weight of the words I had chosen to share, and looked out at the rows of people who had chosen to be there, people willing to listen, to learn, to support one another. For the first time in a long time, I felt quiet certainty settle in my chest. I spoke with honesty and clarity, weaving my story through lessons about courage, self-respect, and financial independence. I told them about the empty seats, the parking lot, the retreat, the discovery, and the choice to step into my life fully. And in their faces, I saw recognition. Not pity but understanding. Choosing myself hadn't destroyed my life. It had rebuilt it. As I stepped down from the podium, applause ringing warmly around me, I realized something. My story wasn't just mine. It was permission for others to walk away from what harms them, to reclaim themselves, to start over. If you've ever felt unseen, abandoned, or forced to pick yourself up alone, share your story in the comments below. And subscribe for more stories about finding the courage to choose yourself. Because every ending holds the possibility of a new beginning, and the courage to take it.